Welcome to our webinar. It is the second week of our 4 weeks webinar series, and we're going to talk about how to succeed as a first-time manager. So a couple of housekeeping questions just in case. We are recording this webinar. I know that there seems to be a couple of sound issues, but hang in there, log out, log back in. If you're having some issues, that tends to solve it. If that doesn't, then we do record all of our webinars. So this webinar will be recorded and available for you. Make sure you follow us on our social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, to make sure that you're receiving those updates as well. Want to direct your attention to the top of your screen. There is an icon with a person with their hand raised. Go ahead and raise your hand if you can hear me. Also, if you ever agree to disagree, you can let me know. If you need me to speak a little louder or speak a little softer, just you can select the appropriate points, as well as if you want me to slow down or speed up because I'm going the wrong speed. The other thing is I can't hear you, so laughter and applause is always appreciated. We do have our comments and questions down below as well. So if at any time you have questions and you want to go ahead and type them in, please do. We'll have a Q&A at the session, but I want this to be as interactive as possible. You know, I think back to when I was a first-time manager, and I would just love to have been able to talk to someone. So last week we talked about the leadership advantage. This week we're going to talk about how to succeed as a first-time manager. But next week we're going to talk about how soft skills affect leadership. And then our last series, our last webinar in October is how to develop your team. So if you're seeing this, there is a theme. We're going to build on this. But before we begin, remember I said this is interactive. So what I want you to do is just go ahead. Are you a current manager? Yes or no? How long have you been a manager? So less than a year, 1 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, 10 years or more. And then on a scale of 1 to 5, how prepared were you before becoming a manager? So 1 is I had no clue what I was doing. It was a congratulations, you're doing your job well. Here you go, you're being promoted. Did you know enough to be dangerous? Like I've taken a couple of courses, I've watched lots of theory, not a lot of application. Maybe you went through a training program where you learned of things, but you weren't able to put them into practice. 4, I could hold my own, or 5, I was ready for anything and everything. So we see overwhelmingly that we do have a lot of current managers, 77%. That's great because when we ask some of these questions, participate. I'm going to give you some information, but as well, if you found something that works, hasn't worked, share it during our polls and our questions. And the majority of you have been managers in that 1 to 5 years. We've got about 25% that are in that 10 plus years. Welcome to the club. And then we're seeing kind of the split is either 1, I have no clue what I was doing, and maybe you're that very first year that you've kind of gotten that first year underneath your belt, or you're thinking back to 10 plus years ago going, man, I was just thrown into the wolves. Oh, if I could just go back and redo a few things. And about an even split, 36% between, I've got a lot of theories, not a lot of applications, and 4, I can hold my own. So what we're going to talk about today is just give you some tips and tools, talk to you about some of those challenges that you're going to experience as a manager. So I can remember when I was 20 years old and the manager of my store, it was a small retail store of a chain that's no longer in business, but I thought I had arrived. After all, I had worked my way up from junior assistant store manager to senior assistant store manager, and now at 20 years old, I had hit the pinnacle of my success, and I was the store manager. I had reached my goal. And then it all came crashing down, right? What do you mean? I've got to motivate people. Oh, and I've got to sell too. A strategic plan. What in the world is that? Lead by example. I'm 20 years old. What do I know? You know, I've got to manage conflict. I've got to hire and fire. What do you mean I've got metrics? I've got to compare myself to other stores. And then succession planning? You mean I've got to find someone that I want to be promoted? I was overwhelmed. Raise your hand if you have ever felt that way. That yes, I have been in that moment when all of a sudden it is right there and oh my gosh, how am I going to balance everything? So I see some hands raising. It's difficult to balance that. And 40% of new managers fail during their first 18 months. And that's a little bit of a gut wrenching heart check, right? 40% of new managers fail. And because a lot of it has to know with one, we've got a lot that's coming on us. I look back, I've got 20 plus years of management and people development and sales. And I look back at where I was at 20 years old. Yes, do the math. I'm over 40. Um, but how did I make it? So my goal today is to one, help you begin to untangle the maze. Two, to give you some hope that if you are feeling that way right now of, oh my goodness, I've got all of these different skill sets and it is really changing from who I was to now I've got to lead a team. We're going to talk to you about that. We're going to give you some tools. Have hope, persevere, stay in there. So what I want you to do is to ask yourself some questions first. With one, what are my strengths, my challenges, and my goals? Because before you can begin to untangle the maze of the responsibilities and to lead others, you have to understand yourself. And then two, ask, how do we engage others, give feedback, and motivate people? And this is something internal that I want you to think about. And this presentation is going to be available for download at the end of our session. So just so that you know, take notes, jot some things down, but really and truly focus on what are your strengths, what are your challenges. Maybe you don't know what your goals are yet. So let's start with this. Ask yourself, do I run from conflict or embrace conflict? Go ahead and select which one it is. What's more important to you, the people or the facts? Okay, so do you work better when I'm juggling 50 things at once? Man, that just makes me happy. Or you can focus on one task until it's done. And then details. Details? Who has time for details? Our details are the reason we reach our goals. They're necessary and critical. So we've got about a 50-50 split with the do you run from conflict or embrace it? What's more important? Facts. So that's 71%. I work better when I'm juggling 50 things at once. Is the overwhelming majority of the people on the call at 71%. Ooh, and 93% our details are the reason we reach our goals. That's very interesting to me because a lot of times what we find out is that everyone has natural behavioral traits. And the amount of those traits help determine our strengths and challenges. So when I asked you those questions of do you run from conflict, do you embrace it, do you understand it, all goes to these four natural behavioral traits. Your level of assertiveness, your communication style, your pace, and then that need for structure. And that need for structure is where those details come from. Do you live in the details? I want to make sure every I is dotted, every T is crossed. Or are you more along those lines of their details are important, but I don't need to concentrate on every single detail. That's why we have other teams. But a lot of times as new managers, what we tend to do is that we don't know who we are. We don't know what our traits are. So we learn through trial and error. But once you understand yourself, once you understand how you communicate, are those times that you're going to want to be able to juggle 50 things at one time, or just start one thing? I've got a process and don't interrupt it. Even down to how you delegate. Because what we know with our 31 years of business is that many times people are promoted into management positions based on their current success. Doesn't mean that they're going to be successful as a manager. Doesn't mean that they have the skill sets to be a manager. But, oh, you're a top performing salesperson. You must be a great sales manager. Understanding what your strengths are and how to understand your areas of opportunity, those challenges are as important as understanding the people that you manage. Because it all comes down to three things. One, you have to be self-aware of you, who you are. What are your strengths that you're bringing to the role? What are your challenges? How are you going to overcome it? You've got to be aware of people, understanding who you're managing, where they complement your strengths, where they complement, no one person can be all things to all people. We all have those natural behavioral traits that in a perfect world and are in times of stress, they tend to come out. How to know that about your team is critical. You don't want to put someone who is more of a people person behind a computer for 8 hours a day with zero interaction with your clients. Just like you don't want to put someone who, you know what, I would rather be behind the scenes. And now you're making me talk to people for 8 hours a day, and people drain me. Because one, you're going to lose really great people because they may not be the right people in the right, they're the right people, but in the wrong position. And you're not going to know how to manage them. So when it talks about self-awareness, one, understand who you are, but a lot of times we're caught up in the promotion or the stress of learning those extra responsibilities, and we completely forget our self-development. Until you are committed to developing yourself, which today is a great start because you're on this webinar, then you can become aware of others. And as the manager, you have to adapt and apply what you know to become a better manager. It doesn't mean that you have to give up your core values. It doesn't mean that you have to completely compromise or bend over backwards because the employee is always right. But it does mean that you adjust a little bit on how you manage. Maybe instead of motivating the way you like to be motivated, you talk to them. And we're going to talk about that. It's very important to understand you are. So here at Omnia, we are a behavioral assessment company, and we have leadership styles, and we have 17 different leadership styles. And what we know is that there are many different styles of leaders. Maybe you are that entrepreneur who's very big picture and fast paced and assertive and relational versus someone who is more, you know, collaborative, behind the scenes, analytical. I want to just start one thing and see it through to completion. And I have to know the details. Or maybe you find that you're that person who says, you know what, by the time I tell you how to do it, I could already have it done, so I'll just take care of it myself. Understand yourself is key. Once you begin to understand yourself, then you can begin to succeed as a manager. Because it all starts with a me versus we mentality. When we first start off in the role in a company, it's about me. What do I need to do to achieve my goals? And even if you're thinking about the team, at the same time, you have that your annual performance evaluation. You may have your own metrics that you have to have. However, as you transition into a manager, you have to take the emphasis off of me and what do I have to do to succeed to we. What does the team have to do? And I love this quote by Gandhi. It says, if you have no character to lose, people will have no faith in you. As you begin to establish yourself as a manager, you have to begin to build up your trust and credibility. Think of it like a bank account. And so whenever we get paid, whether it's direct deposit or a live check, we make a deposit into our bank account. And whenever we purchase something, it makes a withdrawal. At the end of the day, we want to make sure that we have more money in our bank account than what we've spent. It's the same thing with trust. As you begin to become a manager, and this is critical for first-time managers, you're going to make mistakes. However, you want to build your trust up. So every mistake that you make is going to deduct from your trust account. That trust account that your employees, that your peers should have in you. Your goal at the end of the day to still have more trust built up than negatives. And it's not like we can say, okay, today I'm going to deduct $20 from my trust account. That's not the mentality that we have to have. But it's a constant struggle. when you're building that credibility, some of the ways that you say is to say what you mean and mean what you say. Raise your hand if you've ever worked with someone who would say one thing and do something completely different. I know I have. And I'm seeing, oh my gosh, almost every single person's hand is being raised. As that manager, you can say what you mean, and sometimes you have to say, I don't know, but I'll get back with you. And when you say, I don't know, but I'll get back with you, then that's letting them know, okay, we're in this together. You want to make sure that you're not over-promising and under-delivering. A lot of times as managers, especially if maybe, even if it's a first-time team, we're coming in and they're telling us, this is wrong and this is wrong and the other manager did this. And we go, oh, I'm here to fix it. Can you really fix the issue, especially if it's something that may be some organizational changes? I don't like our new processes. Well, as your manager, I'm going to take you right back to the way it was. It may be something that's outside of your control. And if it's outside of your control and you've promised to do it, unless you come back and say, mea culpa, I am so sorry, I did everything I could. However, this is the changes, you're going to deduct from your trust account. And people, your employees that you're managing aren't going to believe that you have their best interest at heart. And then they're also going to take a step back and go, well, if you said this, I can't trust you about anything else. So let's talk a little bit about, how you manage. So are you goal driven and comfortable with conflict? Assertive, ready to take a risk. That do or die manager. We're going to go for it. This is some great strengths, right? Yeah, I've got a goal. If there's an issue, I'm going to address it right now so it doesn't grow into anything larger. I'm going to be assertive. I'm coming in and I'm the manager and this is the way it's going to be. But when it comes to business, okay, we can take some calculated risk. That leadership style is great. A lot of wonderful leaders have it. But let's talk about that. In the box, what are some challenges to that leadership style? That very assertive, take charge, goal-driven person. Think about it. Is that you? What are some of those challenges to that leadership style that you may see? Go ahead and type it in for me. See a couple of people that are typing now. So butting heads, absolutely. Kind of my way or the highway. It can alienate people. Absolutely. Great. Keep them coming. Unapproachable. They're going to do whatever they want to do anyway. They're not a team player. Absolutely. All of these are great things. Not getting input from your team. Absolutely. Missed opportunities because they're not stopping to look and listen to all the different aspects. Absolutely. So what about just being so assertive that some people see them as aggressive? Or maybe they are aggressive, especially in times of stress, right? So in the bottom box, let's go ahead and type some ways that we can overcome these challenges. So if that's you, maybe, what, and you come across as, and go ahead and see, great, Vicki, thanks for starting to type in that lower box. So some of the ways that you could overcome it is if someone thinks that you're so aggressive, is to take time to pause and listen. Absolutely. A lot of times as leaders, we feel like we always have to ask that question, the leading question. So what do you think we should do? Here's what I'm thinking. Our question gets thrown out and we immediately jump in. Well, a lot of times, especially as a manager, if that's us and it's a team that they don't know you, which as a first-time manager, that could be the case. When you start talking to them and throw out that question and say, here's the situation, let's talk about it. What are your ideas? And then take a deep breath. Count to 30 in your head. Maybe you count to 30 again, but silence is uncomfortable. Think about that. That brief moment where, 3 to 5 seconds that I didn't say anything. Y'all are like, oh, did I lose sound? What's going on? No, you didn't lose sound. But if I stop and ask a question, I want to listen to your opinion. So take time to pause, accept that constructive criticism. It is critical that as a first-time manager, you have a mentor that you can turn to. Maybe it's a peer, maybe it's someone who has lots of management experience that you admire the way they manage, and ask them, will you give me some feedback? If you're sitting in our meetings, can you listen to it? If you're that person who's like, get it done, let's just deal with it right away, maybe you could say, unless it's critical, if someone's stealing, you do have to address it immediately, or if there's a safety issue. But maybe you say, okay, I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to wait 24 hours to see if it's coming through. And I love that, accepting constructive criticism with grace. So that feedback, when you take that feedback, it's going to allow you to implement it. And then the other thing too is that if you're listening and you're taking down your assertiveness, even though it's going to be hard, because your first thing is you want to just charge into battle and take care of things, is that you're going to begin to empower your team. Now, as you ask those questions, you can't respond with, no, that's a dumb idea, or maybe you respond with, I like that, let's tweak it a little bit, or, that's a little bit off topic of what our goal is. However, let's bring it back to it. How can we, bring this idea, or thank you for sharing. You never want to rate someone's idea, good or bad, unless, of course, it's the next phenomenal idea that's going to make $1 billion for your company. But as you're talking and throwing out ideas, thank you for that information. Talk through it a little bit more. That, once again, begins to build your trust and credibility within the team. Okay, so let's talk about a different leadership style. This leadership style is a little bit more collaborative, supportive. They prefer the comfort zone. So they just, safe and secure is where we're going to be. I'm going to gather a lot of information. I want us to feel very team-oriented. So I want collaboration. I'm going to be there to support the team that I manage. What are some of the challenges that you think that this particular leadership style will have? Because when you think about it, which leadership style is better? They both have their strengths and their challenges. But what are some challenges to this leadership style? And I see people typing away as we speak. So avoids conflict, absolutely. Hopefully it'll go away. If it doesn't go away, then they may or may not say something depending on how badly it bothers them, or it's going to fester and kind of blow up. Love that. Taken advantage of. Times can be monopolized with other problem solving. Making tough decisions. Exactly. Coming across as a friend and not as a leader. That's a great, Elaine, that's a great point, especially if it's someone who's a peer-to-peer who's now promoted in managing those people that they were peers with. They've got to readjust some of those boundaries, and especially if they're very people-oriented, they could struggle with, I just want to make sure we're all friends. And then, yes, the line of the manager versus friends fades. So what are some of the ways that we can overcome these challenges? Let's type some of those. So all of those are great. They avoid conflict. They can be taken advantage of, especially if they're working with someone who's much more assertive with them, because the other person is just going to take charge and lead. So I see that we have some people typing on ways to overcome these challenges. So one of the ways I love, going back to that conflict, of avoiding that conflict, is the 24-hour rule. Is if it's still bothering you after 24 hours, speak up. I love that. Remember, the role is a manager, not a parent. We can be very collaborative. We can gather the support, but at the end of the day, we've got to hold people accountable, and you do that by setting boundaries. Absolutely. Pick your battles. Yes. So if you know that it's going to cause you stress, then know which ones are the most important battles to pick up. The other thing that you may want to think about is making sure that you say, okay, when you're setting those boundaries, I'm going to gather consensus, but at the end of the day, it's the decision I have to make. You've got to make sure that you're guiding your team to where they need to be. Also, what you want to do is make sure that you're not being so safe and secure that you're sacrificing those goals for other things. You want to make sure that you, and what I mean by that is that, okay, I like my comfort zone, and maybe you're missing out on something critical. You're missing out on the next big thing that if you just touched a little bit, you would have reached it. What are some of those obstacles when we're talking about transitioning from me versus we? We've talked about a few, learning how to tamp down that aggressive assertiveness so that it doesn't come across as aggressive, ramping up a little bit of your I am the coach. I'm going to gather all the information and we are a team, but at the end of the day, I am the coach and the team listens to the coach. But the other big obstacle when you're trying to transition from a me versus we thought is that positional leadership. So what do I mean by positional leadership? Well, John Maxwell has the 5 levels of leadership. If you are not following him, he is a great leadership resource. He's got some things that you can subscribe to. But for him, he has a book called The 5 Levels of Leadership, and the first book level is positional leadership. And a lot of times, regardless of whether we're that assertive leader or that more of that collaborative leader, we look at it as I'm a leader because of my title. So with John Maxwell, that positional leadership is people follow because they have to, not because they want to. And many times when we're in that positional leadership thought process of, and it could be that happiness of, woo, I got promoted, I've been working for it, but we're still too focused on ourselves. Whether it's because we're learning a new skill set, or we're just excited, or, yep, I got the title, I am the boss, woohoo. And so we think, well, I was promoted, so I must be the best. That's not necessarily true. Once again, remember, all people can't be all things. One person can't be all things to all people. You're going to have people on your team that's going to complement your challenges. You need to understand that. As well as you may have someone on your team who's 20 plus years of experience, but they don't want to be promoted. Prior to coming to Omni, I worked in banking, and I had a teller when I asked her, where do you want to be in 5 years? And she said, retired. She was 60. She was ready to end. She had more years of experience than I had been alive in the banking industry. And at one point had been a manager. But when she switched banks, she wanted to go back to the teller because she didn't want the responsibility. I tapped into that resource so I could listen, so I could learn from her. I began to use her as a mentor, not only for myself, but also for new employees who were coming in. Some ways to overcome that positional leadership challenge is one, people follow people, not titles. You have got to begin to build relationships with your employees. And it's not being that, oh, we're friends, we're best friends. It's understanding them, knowing who they are. Give them a reason to follow you. Once again, it's about building that trust and credibility. Know your team's strengths and then check your ego. And I know sometimes that's hard as managers when I was first, fake it till you make it. I'm going to figure it out. But sometimes we can't figure it out. And just asking, how do you do this? What are your thoughts on this is going to help build that trust. No one likes to know it all, right? We all have areas. So know what you need to learn. So one, check your ego for asking for help if you need it. And two, be realistic on what you need. So we talked about those challenges, but the second one is communication. So ask yourself, how do I communicate the vision? How well do I listen? And how do I give feedback? And these three are critical. So one, you want to know as a manager, we have to communicate the vision, the strategic plan. What's the goal of the department, the office, the company? How well do you listen? So one of the challenges that we listed for that very assertive leader is that they may not listen well because they don't want to take that constructive criticism or feedback. And then how do you give feedback? Are you that person who's like, yeah, everything is great, good job, high fives all around? Or are you that person who says, you know what? If it's not broke, I'm not going to fix it. They get a paycheck. That just, as long as they keep getting a paycheck, they must know that they're doing a good job. Well, that's not true because all of us are made up of different communications, styles. So we have our relational communicators who's very people oriented, builds excitement. They tend to be intuitive decision makers. And then we have our analytical communicators. They're factual. They're the problem solvers. They're very objective decision makers. They want to look at the facts and the figures versus the people. Well, as a manager, the very first thing that you need to realize that your number one asset, your highest cost, your number one return on your return on investment are your people. You have to know how you communicate. Are you that people person? Or are you that person who's going to be more along the lines of, let's just focus on the facts? Which one is better? They're both the same. I mean, everyone communicates differently. It's almost like a preference of do you prefer chocolate or vanilla ice cream? But by knowing how you relate, so go back to where we talked about that collaborative person and they want to be everybody's friends, especially if they're relational communicators. They want to make sure everybody's happy. If you're more of that assertive, leader who's very analytical, you could come across as very direct and blunt. I give you a report and you're going to say, there is a typo on page 3, paragraph 4, word 2, and you need to fix it. Okay, yeah, we want to have that second set of eyes, but at the same time, it could be a demotivator for some of your team that wants to be recognized for the effort as well as the results. And regardless of how you communicate, you have to engage your team, you have to connect with them, and you have to influence them. So before you can do that, you have to know, one, let's have some two-way conversation. Who are you? How do you communicate? When I first took on the role as managing with our client advisor team here at Omnia, I sat down with each one of them and said, how can I manage, what's one thing that you want me to know as your manager? And I had one employee who said, please, please, please don't ever pick up the phone and say, can you come to my office? I automatically stress out. Now our office was maybe 5 feet away from each other. And for me, that didn't really make a lot of sense because if someone says, hey, can you come up to my office? I'm like, yeah, sure. What's going on? But by asking that question and filing it away and knowing, okay, hey, Cynthia, can you come to my office? I want your opinion on a report. Her defensiveness is down. The way she communicates is very different than me. As well as I am that, woohoo, great job, everybody. We're doing good. Yeah, you're participating. But for some of you, you're thinking, oh, she's a cheerleader. Great. Just what we need. So now I've got to learn how to connect to those people who aren't cheerleaders. When I go down the hallway and high five everyone and tell them great job, there's that one person who's thinking, yeah, yeah, yeah. You don't even know what I did to get this great job. Knowing that, I can talk to them and go, hey, Megan, great job on asking for, verifying the name of the person that I talked about the 5 levels of leadership. Thank you for taking the initiative to reach out. Oh, wait, now I've given her job specific feedback and they know what I did. Now we begin to connect. And as a manager, once you begin to connect with your employees because you've built that trust and credibility with them, you're doing what you say and saying what you do, you're being open and honest with them, you're using your resources, you begin to build that connection. And as you build that connection, that is where you're going to see your influences grow. It is critical, critical, critical to understand that. And that leads into our second challenge. What's the difference between accountability and versus criticism? And it goes right along the lines of how we communicate. So accountability is stating those clear expectations, holding frequent progress checks, having an action plan review, continuous education, and employee feedback. So I'm going to take it from you holding your team accountable to holding yourself accountable. Have you been given clear expectations of what your role includes. If not, I highly encourage you to reach out to your supervisor, to your manager, to ask them. And then set up some frequent progress checks. Now, you are the owner of your development. Your employer, your manager, the owner of your company is going to give you information, but really, truly, to grow as a manager, you have to take ownership about that. So, what are some of your progress checks? Maybe it's that I'm going to meet with all of my employees in the next 90 days to introduce myself. Um, and then go back after that 90 days and say, how did I do? Constantly look for education. So some of the things that I do, if we've got some great free resources. One, check with your company and see what they offer in the way of professional development. Maybe they use Omnia and we offer our leadership reports or our webinars such as this or on-site trainings. Maybe it's you go to YouTube. John Maxwell does Minute with Maxwell. It's quick video that he sends out via email if you subscribe to it. Takes about a minute to listen, but he touches on different things. What self-development, what leadership books are you reading or listening to on your drive back and forth? You're only going to grow as a manager if you put the time into it. Yeah, you'll have some trial and error, but the more work you put into being a better manager, the quicker it's going to come, and it'll be less trial and error and more success. And then ask your employee for feedback. Just like I asked Cynthia, how can I better manage you? And she gave me feedback. If you ask for it, implement it. You can't ask for it and not implement it. So also remember, if you have questions, go ahead and share any comments in that box. But let's talk about, now that you know about you, let's apply accountability to your employees that you're managing. So are you telling them what they want? And then checking in with them to make sure that you're still in alignment, that you're giving them the opportunity to ask questions about the goals. Are you reviewing the action plans for them as well and offering them continuous education? And so employee feedback is two-way street. You want to get feedback from them, but you also want to give them feedback. So I'm a big believer that when it comes time for the annual evaluation, there should be there should not be any questions at all about it. So what you may want to do is to hold those informal coachings. We've got some great webinars and about that. Also, you may want to say, we're going to meet weekly for new employees, monthly for those employees that are in their first year, and then quarterly afterwards. So you don't want to have meetings just to have meetings, but to have that information and give them that feedback is going to let them know, what are they doing well? Where do they need to improve and move forward? For criticism, let's put about it this way. So once again, so accountability, you're very positive, forward moving, but criticism is more of those inconsistent expectations. There's a lack of feedback. My way is the only way. There's little to no coaching. It addresses issues too quickly. Like as soon as I hang up the phone, you screwed up with that call. And it communicates frustrations professionally, i.e., you screwed up on that call. How do we go back to it? So looking at it for yourself, do you have those inconsistent expectations of yourself? If you're very fast paced like I am, I just and have high expectations of myself, I just want to be perfect as quickly as possible. But if you've only been doing the job for 3 months, you're not going to be perfect. So give yourself some leeway on those expectations. But ask for that feedback, and if you're not getting it from the person that you're asking for, then maybe you need to seek it out in a different area. Biggest mistake as managers is we're trying to prove ourselves, so my way is the only way. Remember that you've got to ask questions and keep your ears open. A lot of times just by asking that question and then taking a step back and letting other people answer it first, you're going to pick up on a lot of information. If you don't have coaching within the company, then seek it out. Like I said, maybe you ask a mentor, maybe you ask a peer, whether inside the company or outside the company, to talk through some of those management. Because what you cannot do is you cannot go to a direct report and say, coach me on managing. There is a big difference between employee feedback of how are you doing? How are we doing? Let me give me some insight and tell me everything that I've done wrong. You have now shifted them from a position of where you're managing them to where they're managing you. And that dynamic never works. Are you addressing issues too quickly? Are you that person who's like, I want to keep everybody underneath my thumb. There's no latitude. I'm a micromanager. And then how are you communicating your frustrations? When it comes to communication, is that emotions are the biggest enemy of strong professional communication. So if it's something that you do allow things to build up and build up and build up, and all of a sudden you feel that it's about to explode, take a deep breath and come back to it. Step away from the computer before you send the flaming emails, making sure that if you get information that you don't want, that you're like eye rolling and sighing. Because communication isn't just verbal. So think about this as well as a manager. Are you telling your employees that you're managing one thing and expecting something else? Or does it change from day to day? Are you coming in, going in your office and closing the door and never available, only to issue orders from on high? My way is the only way. You've got to inspect what you expect. You've got to coach. You've got to address issues in a timely manner, but make sure it's relevant. If it's because someone took your Diet Coke, give them a break. If it's something that, is a client customer issue, you want to address it quickly, but you also want to make sure you address it professionally. So talk to me about this. One of the things I always say is talk to me about the situation with ABC Company. Well, this and this and this is what happened. Okay, so let's see how we can work through it. When you understand the difference between accountability and criticism, it's going to allow you to transition into motivators as well. So using only one word, go ahead and tell me what motivates you. So for me, I like fun things to do. So go ahead, type in the box. What are some of the things that motivates you? Is it money? Is it fun? Is it praise? Great. What else do we have that motivates? Lunch, bonuses, recognition, okay? Money, security, success. I see things coming up. Thanks. Wonderful. Anybody else have anything? A good team. Appreciation. So we're seeing a lot of this. Acknowledgement. Connecting with people, appreciate security. So we're seeing a lot of different things coming up. Now, here's the question I want to ask you. If that you appreciate, is that how you motivate? Because we have a tendency to motivate others the way that we want to be motivated. So if we want praise, we're going to give them praise. If we like money, we're going to start saying, all right, we're running a contest today, and the contest is, if you close so many deals, you get an extra $50. And then we sit back and go, why aren't they competing against each other? Well, if you're managing a team of sales producers, then they're going to go for it. If you're managing a team that's very collaborative and supportive and they work together as a team, then, I don't want to compete against them. But if you say, okay, the team as a whole everybody's going to get an extra $50 on their paycheck. If you reach this goal, you're going to see some of that incentive bounce up. Maybe it's food. Maybe it's a fun environment. Regardless of what it is, we tend to motivate people the way we want to be motivated instead of how our team wants to be motivated. And it goes back to when I said that as a manager, as a successful manager, you have to engage, you have to connect, and you have to influence. So once you begin to connect with your team, you can ask them, hey, what motivates you? What demotivates you? What are some of the things that you hope that we can get? If you could pick an incentive for a day, what is it? I want to wear jeans for a week. Okay, now that gives you some ideas. Once again, it goes back to our natural behavioral traits. Some people are going to want to compete individually and keep track of where they are. So friendly competition is great. Other people look at it as a team. They don't want to compete against their team. So understanding that information is absolutely key before you can move forward. So how do you do it? Well, You ask, but then in your first 90 days, you begin to form an action plan. So if you're in your first 90 days as a manager, which I know a lot of you aren't, but you can even begin to implement this. So many of you were in that 1 to 5 years. If it's a new team, or even if you say, okay, I want to take a step back and really begin to develop myself, how do I do that? Well, in your first 90 days, here's some things. One, you want to celebrate your diversity and collaboration on your team. So think back about what your team has, know your resources, meet with them one-to-one and talk about, hey, how can I better manage you? Create that environment of open communication. If it's something that you've been there long term and you're struggling with it, then take a step back and say, hey, I've got to rebuild that trust. So you create that action plan about how do I rebuild it. Now, don't go back and after saying, hey, I want this watch this great webinar and now we're going to make all these sweeping changes. Don't do that because it's going to stress your team out. Create your action plan for yourself first. Then as you begin to do that, as you begin to talk to people, then you can begin to make some changes. If it's a necessary change, like, okay, I haven't been listening and I don't know how to motivate people, I need to figure that out. I need to get out of my office and talk to people more. What can I do? One of my peers here at Omnia says, if you're that person who'd rather go in your office and shut the door, put 3 pennies on your desk. And by the end of the day, those 3 pennies need to be in your desk. And those 3 pennies represent 3 people that you haven't talked to today about non-task driven work. So I can talk to 3 people, but it's like, hey, is that report ready? Do you have that information for me? Let's have a meeting. But it's 3 non-task related conversations. And it doesn't have to be a 15 to 20-minute conversation. It could be something as simple as, hey, how's it going? Sean, talk to me. How was that webinar that you were on? Or got plans for this weekend? Something, it doesn't have to be long, but something short that you can go back. Take the penny off your desk and put it in your drawer. I would tell people to put it on your calendar reminder. So, I'm scheduling some one-on-ones. As you're meeting with your team, as soon as you're done, you put it back on your calendar to remember it. But all of this takes us back to our third challenge. So we've talked about what some of the things that you can implement and some of the challenges you experience personally as a manager, whether it's that positional leadership or understanding accountability versus criticism. But these challenges are a little bit more difficult. So they're either interpersonal complications, like people just don't like each other, or maybe you have that struggle of you just got promoted and one of the people that you're managing wanted the job too. There's also organizational hurdles. Maybe you're not getting that training that you needed. Maybe there's some changes in the organization that's happening that you can't share. And then last but not least, there's those physical barriers. So how many of you on the call, raise your hand, manage remote employees? Maybe you work outside of the office and you're managing and they're inside the office. Or maybe you are all in different places. So I'm seeing quite a bit. When it becomes to remote employees or telecommuting, which is becoming more and more popular, there are some additional physical barriers when you're trying to manage as a first-time manager. You're not on site. You can't go and look them in the eye or walk by their office and wave. How do you coach them? Use your resources such as technology. Make sure that, especially if you have some of your office on site while 2 or 3 are off site, that you don't forget those off site employees. If you're Skyping or using Zoom calls for that video conferencing piece of things, you also want to make sure that you are when they're talking, that you're looking at them. Listen, video conferencing is wonderful, but everyone knows when you're not paying attention to them, if you're looking at your computer. If that's the case, then what you may want to do is say, I'm going to be taking some notes, so then at least they know that, yes, I'm listening to you, and that's why I'm not paying attention. And then restate, okay, so here's what I heard you say. You can also look up from time to time. Try to schedule at least one point where all of the team is together at least once a quarter or once every 6 months so that they have that interaction, that team dynamic as well. So whereas the other two challenges are very much those personal challenges that you can overcome, the challenges 3 are more those hard challenges. They can be overcome. You just have to be a bit more creative about it. So John Maxwell says, when the leader lacks confidence, the followers lack commitment. And what that means is that you're not going to be perfect about everything. And it's okay to say, I'm not quite sure about this, let me come back to it. But you have to believe in your ability to lead. You have to create your personal development plan. Use your resources, communicate your needs, and inspect what you expect. And most of all for me is that you've got to have the confidence to lead your team, to say, you know what, if our team doesn't reach our goal, I'm leading the team. Someone may have made a mistake, but don't throw them to the wolves. Talk to them about it, because as they feel that you have their back, they're going to believe in you. So want to go ahead and open it up for any questions that you have. I know our time is coming close. Thank you so much. So you've already started on the path of creating your development plan. So you've recognized, I want to learn more about being a better manager. How do I do it? Well, one, as I said, create that development plan, and we have one that you can download, as well as use your resources, those mentors in your office. But any questions that you have, go ahead and type in your box now. As you're typing those questions, just want to remind you that next Thursday we do have another workshop coming up called How Soft Skills Affect Leadership, and then on the 27th, How to Develop Your Team. So one of the questions that I'm always asked is, okay, Kim, you gave me information, but you've talked about different leadership styles, but I have no idea how I lead. Where do I go from here? Well, with Omnia, we are a behavioral assessment company. We help with selection as well as development. And if you have not tried our leadership report ever before, you can click on the link that says take your assessment here in the helpful links. Use the promo code in the box to receive a complimentary Omnia leadership assessment. That will tell you about your strengths, your challenges, as well as give you some ideas for an action plan. In addition, one of the other questions I'm asked is, how do you prepare? Okay, I want to move up, but how do you prepare before you're actually in that management position? My first recommendation is to talk to your manager, talk to them about your career pathing, where you want to go, and ask for some insights, some additional projects of where you can begin to start so that you can begin to move forward and have some of that practical experience in a safe environment. A lot of times we say, okay, you're promoted, congratulations, but we don't take a step back and say, okay, let's give them an area to begin to try some of these leadership roles without fear of failure. So in addition to that, in the downloads, you can download that leadership development plan. We've also added an employee development plan, so it's something that you can share with your employees, as well as a copy of our presentation. You can also register for our webinar tomorrow, How Soft Skills Affect Leadership. But once again, I want to open it up. I'm not seeing any questions being typed in, so just one more moment. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them in. And if not, if you have any questions, you can contact me. My email number is kbussey@omniagroup.com, as well as our direct line. And I just want to say thank you so much for committing to knowing what type of leader you want to be, and committing to your own management styles. And hopefully you've heard some tools and tips today that you can begin to implement. So we don't have any questions, so thank you very much for attending, and make sure you download that information, and we will talk to you next week. Thank you.